The rain outside my window had been falling for hours, soft but relentless, like a steady whisper of unrest. I sat at my small dining table, the dim light from the old lamp casting a dull glow over the open bills strewn across the surface. My tea had gone cold, untouched. When my phone buzzed, I glanced at the screen and saw "Mom" flash across it. I felt a flicker of unease but answered anyway, hoping it was just a check-in or an update about Dad's doctor's appointment. But the voice that greeted me wasn't warm or motherly. It was clipped, almost mechanical. "Where's the money, Sarah?" I froze. "Mom? What do you mean?" "The $90,000. You need to return it immediately. Your father and I have been going through the accounts. You can't just take that money and run off." Her tone cut through me like ice. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I didn't take anything. That's my savings. I earned that money." She scoffed. "Savings? You mean the money you owe us? We invested so much in you, raising you, supporting you, and this is how you repay us? You don't just take family, money, and leave." My heart pounded. That money came from my jobs, the tutoring, the night shifts at the diner, everything I did to help out at the store. You never said you'd take it. She didn't listen. "If you don't pay it back, don't bother coming home. We're done supporting you, and don't expect to see your name in the will." The call ended abruptly, and I was left staring at the screen, the cold emptiness wrapping around me like a shroud. For a long while, I didn't move. The rain continued, blurring the window, and outside, cars passed by, oblivious to the unraveling of my world. I tried to process what had just happened. $90,000. The sum I'd saved through years of sacrifice. Long shifts, missed social events, choosing frugality when I could have lived a little more freely. All for the promise of security, a future I'd built on the shaky foundation of family loyalty. I couldn't breathe. It was as if the very air had thickened, pressing against my lungs. I forced myself to stand, hands trembling, and crossed the room to the small dresser by my bed. On top of it sat a faded photograph, a younger me, beaming between my parents, back when love wasn't conditional and support didn't come with strings attached. I traced my fingers over the photo, and tears stung my eyes. How had it come to this? I had trusted them, believed in them, and all they saw in me was a bank account. I paced the small room, anger bubbling up from the pit of my stomach. I wanted to call back, to scream, to demand an explanation. How could they accuse me of stealing my own money? How could they dismiss years of effort, as if everything I had done was just a favor owed back? The betrayal cut deeper than any wound I'd ever felt. I remembered the countless nights I had stayed up late balancing books for Dad's store, the days I'd skipped meals to save a little more for the future. I had hoped, naively, that my dedication would mean something. My chest tightened, and I could feel a scream building inside me, but it wouldn't come out. Instead, I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, shaking with silent sobs. After what felt like hours, I forced myself to stand. I couldn't stay curled up and defeated. I looked around my apartment, my sanctuary, the one place I had made for myself, away from the suffocating expectations. I was done being their pawn. A thought crossed my mind, like a tiny ember in the dark. Maybe it was time to fight back. I'd spent years being the obedient daughter, always bending, always giving, but not anymore. I wasn't going to let them steal my future. I grabbed a notebook and started writing. Every memory, every sacrifice, every time they had taken without giving. My hand moved faster as my thoughts spilled out. I needed to make sense of it all, to reclaim the narrative that had been so twisted. By the time I looked up, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and new. I breathed deeply, wiping my face. I wasn't done crying, not by a long shot, But now there was something else in me, a sense of purpose. The next morning, I called my best friend, Lisa. Her voice was soft, calming, a reminder that not everyone who loved me would turn on me. As I recounted what had happened, she didn't interrupt. When I finally finished, there was a long silence. "You can't just let them get away with this," Lisa said firmly. "I know," I whispered. "But I don't know where to start." She hesitated. "You start by not letting them control you anymore. They're wrong, Sarah. You deserve to be happy and free. You deserve to keep what's yours." Her words were like a balm, soothing the raw edges of my heart. I wasn't alone. Before I hung up, Lisa asked me a question that hadn't crossed my mind. "Do you think they ever really loved you? Or was it always about what you could do for them?" The thought lingered long after the call ended, like a bitter aftertaste. I wanted to believe they had loved me once, truly, selflessly. But the more I thought about it, the more I saw the pattern. How every kind word was followed by a favor. Every praise came with a debt. The storm inside me wasn't over, but now I had something to hold on to. A realization that maybe I had been the one keeping this twisted idea of family alive. I stared at the photo one last time before tucking it away in a drawer, out of sight. It was time to rewrite my story. I grew up in that dusty old shop on Main Street, where the smell of fresh paper and musty wood clung to the walls like a memory that refused to fade. My father had opened it before I was born, back when he still believed that owning something, no matter how small, was the definition of success. I used to watch him from behind the counter as he chatted with customers, his voice warm and smooth, like a radio host from a better era. He always made it look easy, smiling, shaking hands, promising quality and honesty. The truth was far less polished. When I turned 16, I started working there after school. At first, it felt like a privilege to be part of the family legacy. My friends went to the movies or gossiped at the mall. I was sweeping the floors, counting the till, and learning how to talk to suppliers who were growing tired of waiting for their checks. My father called it character building, and I believed him. I wanted to make him proud. Mom would stand behind the register, her fingers clacking against the old calculator, sighing heavily at every total. "Every penny counts," she'd say, dropping the coins into the till with exaggerated care. "Someday, this will all be yours, Sarah." I'd smile back, my heart swelling with pride. I believed her too. Looking back, I wonder how I missed the signs. Or maybe I didn't miss them. I just chose not to see them. There were always excuses. My father's constant borrowing from the register, the checks that bounced, the suppliers who stopped calling. He would brush it off with a laugh, saying business had its ups and downs. "We're just in a rough patch," he'd say, ruffling my hair. "It'll turn around. It always does." But it never did. I remember the first time he asked me for money. I had just started working part-time at the diner up the street, saving what little I could for college. I had dreams once, going away, studying journalism, living in a cramped apartment in a city where everything felt alive. But when Dad sat me down, his hands wringing together, his eyes heavy with desperation, I folded like paper. "Just a little help to get us through the month," he had said, voice cracking like it pained him to ask. I gave him everything I had saved. $600. I remember handing it to him, his hands shaking as he took it, promising it would be paid back with interest. It never was. And it didn't stop there. Every few months there was another emergency, another shortfall, another crisis. And I always stepped up because that's what good daughters did. I ignored the whispers from friends who saw more than I did. "You can't keep bailing them out. Sarah," my best friend Lisa would say, her voice tight with worry. "It's not your responsibility." But I couldn't listen. Family came first. It wasn't just the money. It was everything. I gave up the idea of moving away, of college, of anything that didn't revolve around the shop. I worked double shifts, taking on whatever jobs I could find, funneling the paychecks straight back to the family. Mom would smile at me across the counter, her eyes crinkling with pride. "We couldn't do this without you," she would say, her hands clasped over mine. I clung to that praise, to the idea that I was indispensable. It felt like love. It felt like purpose. I used to wear a necklace she gave me, a delicate silver chain with a tiny heart pendant. "For my good girl," she had said when she clasped it around my neck on my 18th birthday. I never took it off, not even when the clasp began to wear thin and the heart lost its shine. It became a part of me, just like my loyalty to them. But loyalty is a rope, isn't it? It binds you tight, holds you steady, but it can also strangle. It wasn't until my 25th birthday that the first real crack appeared. We were sitting around the dinner table, Mom, Dad, and me. They had just handed me a gift, a jewelry box, polished and gleaming. I opened it, expecting something simple. Instead, I found a gold bracelet, encrusted with tiny diamonds that glittered under the light. My breath caught. "It's beautiful," I whispered, running my fingers over the cool metal. Dad grinned, leaning back in his chair with a glass of whiskey, balanced in his hand. "Only the best for my girl," he said, his eyes shining with pride. But as I turned the bracelet over in my hands, I noticed something. The tag. It hadn't been removed. When I peeked at the back, the price made my stomach drop. $2,000. I looked up, my eyes searching their faces. "How did you afford this?" I asked, the words feeling sharp and ungrateful as they left my mouth. Mom's smile faltered just a bit. "We're doing fine," she said quickly, waving her hand. "Business is picking up. Just a little treat for you. That's all." I tried to smile back, but the doubt had already planted itself, growing roots that wound around my chest. For the first time, I wondered where the money came from. For the first time, I questioned what they had told me all these years. The bracelet stayed in its box, untouched. I couldn't wear it. It felt heavy with questions I wasn't ready to ask. The shop began to struggle more openly after that. I worked longer hours, picked up more shifts, watched my bank account shrink as theirs stayed mysteriously afloat. Every time I asked, they brushed me off. "We're fine," Dad would say, his smile stretched thin. "Don't you worry about it." But I did. I worried every day, and I kept giving, because that's what good daughters did. When they demanded that $90,000 back, I realized it was never mine at all. They had seen me as a piggy bank, a lifeline, an endless resource to tap. I was the good daughter, the one who sacrificed, the one who gave up everything for the promise of someday. Only now I realized someday was never coming. I drove through the wrought iron gates of their suburban mansion, the wheels of my old sedan crunching over the gravel path that gleamed under the afternoon sun. The house rose up before me, all white columns and manicured hedges, a symbol of everything I had helped them build, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, before finally cutting the engine. The wind rustled the tall oaks that lined the driveway, whispering secrets I had been too blind to hear. My footsteps felt heavy as I approached the door, every step pulling me deeper into the shadows of our shared past. I didn't bother to knock. It had been my home once. Or so I'd thought. Inside, the air was still and cool, scented with lavender and old wood polish. My mother sat at the dining table, her back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look up as I walked in. My father stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the lawn as if I hadn't just walked in unannounced. "Sit," he said, his voice clipped and final. My stomach nodded, but I obeyed. The chair creaked beneath my weight, and I couldn't help but feel like a child being summoned for punishment. My father turned from the window, a folder tucked under his arm. He set it down on the table with a deliberate calmness that sent a chill through me. His eyes met mine, cold, distant, unfamiliar. He slid the folder toward me with a single flick of his wrist. "What's this?" I asked, my voice cracking, despite my best efforts. "An accounting," he replied simply. I opened it, the pages crisp and fresh, each one itemized with dates, amounts, and descriptions. My eyes scanned the entries. Childhood expenses: $42,000 food and shelter, age 0-18, $60,000 school supplies and extracurriculars, $15,000 medical bills, $8,000 clothing, $5,000. The list went on, a tally of every cent they claimed to have spent raising me. At the bottom, the final total was circled in red ink, $150,000. I blinked, disbelief slamming into me like a wave. What is this?" I stammered, my hands trembling as I gripped the edges of the folder. My mother looked up then, her gaze hard and unflinching. "You've taken more than your share, Sarah. We've invested in you for years, and now it's time you repay your debts." "Debts?" My voice broke, but she didn't flinch. "Are you serious? You're charging me for growing up?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's only fair. We gave you everything. You owe us." I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted between their faces, searching for a crack, a hint of mercy. There was none. My father cleared his throat, reaching for his whiskey glass on the table. He sipped it slowly before speaking again. "The $90,000? It's just a fraction of what you owe us. This is merely the beginning." His voice was steady, emotionless. "We've let you coast for too long. Now it's time to pay your dues." I felt something snap inside me, like the taut string of a violin pulled too tight. Years of sacrifice flashed before my eyes. Missed school trips, unpaid internships to help at the shop, scrubbing floors while my friends went to prom, counting pennies while they dined out at 5-star restaurants. "What about everything I did?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "The nights I worked for free, the loans I helped pay off, I gave you everything." My father shrugged, sipping his whiskey again. "It was part of your duty as our daughter." I felt bile rise in my throat. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, that's not family. That's not love." My mother's eyes sharpened, her hands still folded neatly in front of her. "Family means you give back. It means loyalty." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Loyalty?" I spat, my voice rising. "You call this loyalty? You've been bleeding me dry for years and now you want more?" My father watched me with cool detachment. "Watch your tone," he warned, his voice low and controlled. "We're still your parents." I swallowed back the scream building in my chest. My hands trembled as I leaned over the table, meeting his gaze head-on. Parents don't charge their children for existing. I don't remember leaving. One moment, I was standing over them, shaking with fury, and the next I was outside, stumbling down the front steps. The sky above me was a steely gray, clouds rolling in like they were carrying the weight of my betrayal. My hands fumbled for my car keys, slipping against the metal before I finally managed to unlock the door. I fell into the driver's seat, the leather creaking beneath me as I slammed the door shut. My chest heaved, breath coming in ragged gasps as the reality settled in. They had never seen me as their daughter. I was a debt, an obligation, a line item on their financial statements. Every sacrifice I'd made, every night spent working late, every dollar handed over, wasn't enough. It was never enough. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, tears blurring my vision. My throat burned from the sob that clawed its way out, raw and unrestrained. I let it come, let the betrayal pour out of me in ragged, ugly gasps. When the tears finally stopped, all that remained was silence. And then, something else. Anger. It started small, a flicker of heat in my belly, slowly spreading to my fingertips, my cheeks, my chest. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, and I raised my eyes to the mansion before me, the white columns gleaming like ivory towers. I had built that. Me. My hands, my sweat, my sacrifices. They had taken everything I gave and now wanted more, but I was done being their pawn. The ember of rebellion grew, flaring hot and bright. I sat back, wiping my cheeks with the back of my hand. I wasn't going to be their puppet anymore. I wasn't going to beg. I reached over to the glove compartment and pulled out the faded photograph of us, the one I had carried for years, folded and creased from wear. I stared at their smiling faces, at my own naive grin, and then I ripped it in half. The pieces fluttered to the passenger seat, and I watched them settle, fragmented and broken. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine growling to life beneath me. I will not be their puppet anymore, I whispered, my voice steady, resolute. My hands gripped the wheel with newfound resolve. I pulled out of that driveway with dust kicking up behind me, not bothering to look back. I sat alone in my apartment, the silence pressing against my ears like a weight. My fingers hovered over the screen of my phone, the familiar names and numbers lined up in perfect, orderly rows. I scrolled past Dad, past Mom, past the long list of contacts I had dutifully kept for years. People from their world, not mine. My hand trembled as I selected them all and pressed delete. There was a hollow sort of finality in watching the list disappear, name by name, until the screen was empty, clean. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. I wasn't done. I opened my social media apps next. Photos of family dinners, Sunday barbecues, holiday celebrations, all carefully curated snapshots of a life that never truly belonged to me. I stared at a picture of us three, standing in front of the shop with forced smiles and tired eyes. My father had his arm around my shoulders, gripping me just a little too tight. I remembered how his fingers had dug into my skin just before the photo was taken, reminding me to smile wider. My thumb hovered over the delete account button, hesitating only for a heartbeat before I pressed it. The app blinked out of existence, taking years of manufactured happiness with it. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Mom. I watched it ring, her name flashing on the screen like a warning. When it stopped, I blocked her number. Then I did the same to his. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat back, the room stretching out around me, vast and unfamiliar. For the first time, I was untethered. Free. 2 weeks later, I was gone. I found a modest studio in a town 3 hours away, far enough that no one would think to look for me. The place smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the kind of place where the windows stuck when you tried to open them, and the floors creaked with every step. I loved it instantly. I spent the first week unpacking my life, one box at a time. There wasn't much. Just clothes, a handful of books, some kitchen essentials, and a single photo I had decided to keep. Me at 5 years old, sitting on a swing with my hair in braids, unburdened and free. I tucked it into the corner of the mirror, in my tiny bedroom, a reminder of who I used to be before they sank their hooks in. My landlord was a spry woman in her 70s named Helen. She lived downstairs, her apartment filled with the scent of lavender and freshly baked bread. She knocked on my door the first evening I moved in, holding a basket of muffins and a crooked smile. "Figured you might be hungry," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Moving always makes me ravenous. I took the basket with both hands, the warmth seeping into my palms. I hadn't realized how cold I'd been. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice softer than I intended. Helen patted my arm. "It's nice to have a young face around here. You let me know if you need anything, all right?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She left with a wave, and I stood in my doorway, holding that basket like it was made of glass. No one had been kind to me for so long. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. I found work at a small bookstore a few blocks from my apartment. The place was old and smelled of paper and leather, its shelves towering and cramped. I loved it, immediately. The owner, Mr. Hendricks, was a gentle soul in his 60s who wore cardigans even in the summer. He hired me on the spot, saying he'd been praying for someone who knew the difference between good fiction and pulp. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment, but I accepted it anyway. My days settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings were spent shelving books, afternoons at the register, evenings attending night classes at the local community college. For the first time I was learning, really learning. I chose courses that spoke to me: literature, creative writing, finance. I kept to myself mostly, but Helen would visit often, bringing me leftovers or inviting me down for tea. She didn't ask questions, and I never offered answers. We found a comfortable rhythm that didn't require explanations. Months passed, and with each one I felt a little stronger. My savings grew, my classes became more engaging, and the bookstore began to feel like home. Mr. Hendricks even let me run the evening shifts by myself, trusting me with the keys and the register. One evening, as I was closing up, I found myself lingering in the financial section. My fingers trailed over the spines, stopping at a book titled Forensic Accounting. Follow the Money. I pulled it off the shelf and flipped through its pages, the language dense but captivating. A thought crept in, slow and simmering. I took the book home, devouring it over late nights and quiet mornings before work. I started researching, combing through old business records I had copied from my parents' office, noting every inconsistency, every unbalanced ledger, every missing penny. What began as curiosity soon turned into obsession. I spent hours hunched over spreadsheets, highlighting discrepancies, tracing bank accounts, marking down addresses. I found shell companies, hidden investments, offshore accounts, all tied back to their business, all kept under my father's name. Page by page, I built a case. One file at a time, I documented everything, compiling a stack of evidence that grew thicker by the week. It became my ritual, my quiet rebellion. I thought of it as healing, my own form of closure. Each page I filled was another strand of control I cut away. One evening, Helen invited me for dinner. Her apartment was warm and cluttered, the air filled with the smell of rosemary chicken. She poured me a glass of wine without asking, and settled, across from me at her tiny lace-covered table. "You look different," she said after a while, her eyes sharp with observation. I smiled, sipping the wine. "Different how?" "Lighter," she replied, her lips curling into a smile. "Like you finally put down something heavy." I stared at her, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. I hadn't cried in months. "I guess I have." She reached across the table, her hand warm and solid over mine. "Good. Whatever it is, leave it where it belongs, in the past." I nodded, squeezing her hand. But I knew, deep down, that I wasn't quite ready to leave it behind. Not yet. There was still one more thing left to do. Years passed like whispers, soft, unhurried, almost forgiving. I rebuilt my life from the ashes of what they had left behind, my hands steady, my heart hardened, but not unkind. The bookstore that once served as my sanctuary became mine. Mr. Hendricks retired the winter after my 3rd year there, leaving me, the keys and a smile that held more faith than I'd ever seen in my own father's eyes. "You'll do good things here, Sarah," he said, patting my shoulder. I know it. I did more than good things. I turned that place into a cornerstone of the community. I expanded the shelves, filled them with new titles, invited local authors for readings, created a small corner for children's books where parents could linger and read with their little ones. The scent of fresh paper and ink became my salvation. And when the walls of that old building began to feel too tight, I bought the empty storefront next door. I watched as the workers knocked down walls, plaster dust floating in the air like glittering snowfall. I stood with my hands on my hips, smiling as my dreams unfolded in real time. The sign above the door read simply, "Ashes to Steel. Books and Community." I didn't stop with the bookstore. My obsession with financial records, the meticulous tracing of every penny, had grown into something sharper, something stronger. I enrolled in night classes for financial consulting, immersing myself in balance sheets, forensic accounting, and business law. Numbers, I realized, told stories. They bled secrets onto paper, secrets that most people never bothered to read. But I did. I learned to follow the trails, each line item a breadcrumb leading back to the truth. My side business grew from whispered referrals to local shop owners, then to larger clients. I taught people to protect their assets, to unearth hidden debts, to shield themselves from the kind of theft that wore the mask of love. I made my first million before I turned 35. I bought my first house the following year. A modest place, stone-bricked and ivy-covered, the kind of home I'd once only seen in magazines. The rooms smelled of cedar and vanilla, and the view from the window stretched out over a hillside of pines that swayed gently in the wind. I planted roses in the garden out front, soft blush ones that bloomed in early spring, their scent filling the air like a promise. I spent my mornings there with coffee and silence, watching the world wake up around me, knowing that I had built it all on my own. It was on one of those quiet mornings, sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee warming, my hands that I remembered the files, the ones I had hidden away in a shoebox under my bed, filled with copies of their bank statements, their business filings, their offshore accounts. I hadn't touched them in years. Not since I left. I stood, setting my mug on the wooden railing, and went inside. My steps echoed against the hardwood floors as I made my way to the bedroom, kneeling to pull the shoebox from beneath the bed. Dust puffed into the air as I lifted the lid, revealing the neat stacks of papers I had compiled, each one labeled and marked. My fingers brushed over the pages, skimming the familiar names of shell companies, the routing numbers, the hidden deposits. My heart beat steadily. No panic, no fear. Just purpose. I spent hours at my desk, the sun setting and rising again, the world moving around me as I combed through each line. And that's when I found it. My name. It was still listed on 3 of the main business accounts, tied directly to their primary assets. My fingers shook slightly as I traced the signatures. He had never bothered to remove me. I was still, in every legal sense, a part owner. A smile crept across my lips, slow, unyielding. The ember of rebellion I had carried for years flared into something stronger, hotter. I called my lawyer the next morning. I sat in my lawyer's office 2 days later, my hands folded neatly in my lap. She was a sharp-eyed woman with steel gray hair and a voice like velvet over iron. I had chosen her specifically because she didn't ask questions. She just got things done. "It's all legal," she confirmed, flipping through the documents I had provided. "You are listed as co-owner on multiple assets. With this evidence, you have the right to demand an audit." I nodded, my heart steady. "Do it." Her eyes flicked up to mine. "You understand what this will do?" I met her gaze head-on. "Yes." She didn't press further. The paperwork was filed that afternoon, and within days, their accounts were frozen, their business halted. Legal. Notices went out. Demands for transparency, financial audits, explanations for discrepancies that had been brushed under the rug for years. The whispers started shortly after. Neighbors, suppliers, old friends. The business faltered. Suppliers stopped extending credit, and their clean suburban world began to crack at the edges. I read about it in the local papers, the headlines sharp and unyielding. The first call came 2 weeks after the freeze. I saw my mother's name flash across the screen, her picture still attached to the contact I hadn't bothered to delete. I watched it ring, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea, the steam curling up into the morning light. I didn't answer. The second call came the next day. My father this time. It rang longer, more desperate. I let it ring out. The third call was from an unknown number, but I knew it was them. I blocked it without hesitation. They continued for days. Voicemails, messages, emails that landed in the junk folder I never checked. I didn't listen to a single one. Was sitting in the bookstore one rainy afternoon, listening to the soft patter of rain against the windows, when Helen came by. She was older now, her silver hair pulled back in a braid, eyes still sharp as glass. She set down a box of scones on the counter and gave me a look I had come to recognize. "They're talking, you know," she said, unwrapping her scarf. "About what happened to your folks." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" She nodded, settling into the armchair by the window. "Lost their house, I hear. Business, too. Rumor is they had to sell just to cover the legal fees." I took a deep breath, feeling the air expand in my lungs, clear and unburdened. "I guess debts always come due," I said, pouring her a cup of tea. She smiled at me, slow and approving. "Guess so." I settled into the chair across from her, the rain tapping softly against the glass. For the first time in my life, I felt no weight, just lightness, just air. I had walked through fire, and I had come out the other side, unbroken, stronger, remade, from ashes to steel. I sent the invitation on a Wednesday morning, hand-delivered, by a courier who assured me it would reach their hands by noon. It was printed on thick, cream-colored paper, the kind reserved for weddings or elegant galas. I had chosen each word carefully, sculpting it with the precision of a blade. Dinner, my house. Saturday at 7 p.m. It will be good to talk. I signed it simply with my name. No affection, no pretense of familial obligation, just the stark finality of ink pressed into paper. I didn't expect a response. I knew they would come. The house gleamed under the soft glow of evening light, every surface polished to a reflective shine. I had arranged for the dining room to be set beautifully. Crystal, glasses that caught the light, silverware polished to a mirror finish, china plates that glowed with a delicate pearlescence. I moved through the room like a conductor, adjusting the flowers in the centerpiece, aligning the silverware, lighting the tall white candles that flickered gracefully on the table. I wore a dark emerald dress, simple but elegant, with sleeves that brushed my wrists and a neckline that whispered of power, not fragility. My hair was pinned back neatly, my makeup minimal but sharp. I had imagined this evening for years, rehearsing the words, the expressions, the pauses. But now, standing in the glow of candlelight, I realized I wasn't nervous. I was ready. At exactly 7, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find them standing there, my parents, dressed in their finest. My mother wore pearls and a tailored navy dress that hugged her frame in the way she always liked, regal and composed. My father stood beside her, his suit pressed and perfect, the lines of his face sharper than I remembered. They smiled, too wide, too eager. "Sarah," my mother breathed, stepping forward with open arms as if no time had passed. I didn't move. And she faltered, her arms dropping to her sides. "Come in," I said, stepping back and gesturing to the hallway. The silence stretched as they stepped over the threshold. eyes darting around the space with thinly veiled surprise. The house was elegant. Soft wooden floors, vaulted ceilings, walls lined with art I had chosen myself. They followed me into the dining room, and I watched as my father's eyes flickered to the chandelier above the table, his gaze lingering on the polished wood and the heavy curtains that framed the windows. "You've done well for yourself," he murmured, his voice edged with something I couldn't quite place. I smiled politely, gesturing for them to sit. I poured the tea myself, setting each cup in front of them with deliberate care. My mother watched me with tight eyes, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "We were surprised to hear from you," she began, her voice layered with artificial sweetness. "It's been a while?" "It has," I replied, settling across from them. "But I thought it was time we talked." My father's fingers drummed lightly against the table. "We heard about the store," he said carefully. "Your business. It's quite impressive." I nodded. "Thank you. It's doing well." An uneasy silence settled, stretching thin and taut across the polished table. My mother cleared her throat delicately. "We've had some troubles lately." Her eyes flickered to my father, who stared into his cup. "The business isn't what it used to be. There were some unexpected audits." I sipped my tea, the warmth of it spreading through my chest. "I heard," I replied softly, setting the cup back down with a gentle clink. Their eyes snapped to mine, surprise flickering in the depths. My father leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "We were thinking, maybe you could help us out," he said slowly, each word weighed and measured. I tilted my head, my fingers tracing the rim of my cup. "Help you?" My mother leaned in, her hands reaching across the table as if we were friends conspiring over afternoon tea. "We know you have resources now, connections, just a little to get us back on our feet." Her voice softened, and for a moment, she almost seemed genuine. "We're still family, Sarah." I smiled then, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. "Family," I echoed, my eyes fixed on hers. "That's what you want to talk about, my calm." Mother blinked, her smile faltering just slightly. "Of course, blood is blood. Nothing changes that." My fingers slid across the polished wood of the table, reaching for the folder I had placed there earlier. I pulled it into the center, the leather cover smooth beneath my touch. "Then you won't mind going through this with me," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. Their eyes dropped to the folder, suspicion blooming in their expressions. "What's this?" my father asked, his voice sharper now. "Transparency," I replied, opening the folder and sliding the first document. Across the table, it was a bank statement, thick with red lines and highlighted transfers. Offshore accounts, hidden loans, money siphoned from my savings over the course of 10 years. Their eyes widened, and I watched as the facade of composure cracked, splintering right before me. I slid another page forward, a list of fraudulent business loans, signed under my name. "You were sloppy," I continued, my voice calm. "You left me on as a co-owner. Legally, I had every right to call for an audit." My father's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the lines with a desperation I had never seen before. My mother's mouth opened and closed, her lips moving but no sound coming out. "How did you?" she whispered, finally, her voice cracking. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You asked me to pay back the $90K. I think I just did." The silence stretched long and thin, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire in the corner. I reached for my final piece, sliding a photograph across the table. It was a picture of the bookstore, sun-drenched and vibrant, its new sign shining above the door. "Ashes to Steel." Next to it was another photograph. Me in front of my house, roses blooming bright and defiant in the front yard. My mother stared at the images, her hands limp in her lap. "You did this," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "All of this?" I met her eyes, my gaze unwavering. "Family doesn't do what you did. I'm making my own." I rose from the table, my heels clicking against the marble floors as I walked to the doorway. I paused, turning back to see them staring at the photographs, the folder of evidence still spread before them. They looked smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in, like the house they had built with my sacrifices had become a cage. "Goodbye," I said softly, my voice carrying across the stillness. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I left them there, surrounded by the weight of their own decisions, the empire they had built on lies and manipulation crumbling beneath their feet. My heels clicked rhythmically down the hallway, echoing through the silence. Outside, the air was crisp and clear, the night sky stretching wide and endless above me. I breathed deeply, the cold biting at my lungs, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. I walked to my car, slid inside, and started the engine. The lights flickered on, illuminating the road before me. I didn't look back.